Hello everyone, my name is Michelle, and today we are going to be reviewing 4 tools and tricks in Maya. These are 4 fairly simple techniques, but they can easily help to elevate a project. And in order to demonstrate some of these, we will be using this 3D model of a cup. So the first one that we'll be demonstrating today is the use of the bend tool. Now this can be very helpful if, say, you want to create any kind of curved object, maybe something like a lamppost, something like the handle of this cup, etc. And in order to do this, the first thing that we're going to do is get a cylinder polygon and add it to our scene like so. Now for this demo, I'm going to be taking this cylinder, I'm going to curve it, and then I'm going to use it to create a handle-like shape. So the first thing that I'm going to do is use the scale tool, and I want it to be a relatively narrow tube, as keep in mind this will affect my curve, and so I don't need it to be too large if it's going to be a cup handle. Next, using the scale tool, I am going to extend the length of the cylinder so it has a very long sort of tube-like shape. Alright, so the next step that we want to do, and this is very important, is go to the side menu here and go under Polycylinder 2. Now this gives us our polycylinder history, which has a number of settings specific to the cylinder. And so what I want to do is increase the subdivisions height. Now, in order to have an effective curve, you want to have at least 15 subdivisions. You can increase it if you'd like, and while you can go with fewer subdivisions if you like, the only difference is that it does make it slightly more difficult if you want to have a smooth curve. So I'm going to be leaving this at 15, and you can leave your subdivisions caps to whatever you'd like it to be. In this case, I'm going to keep mine at 1. So this is the very narrow tube-like shape that we have right now. And this is the part where we curve it. So what you're going to do is go up to the top menu here, and in the toolbar, you want to select Deform. It will open a number of menu options, but we want to focus on the one labeled Nonlinear. And under Nonlinear, we are going to select the first option, which is Bend. Now, if it worked correctly, it should create this Bend 1 tab in your cylinders as part of your cylinder menu settings. And so it has, and as well you will also notice this sort of kind of pink or dark blue line here. And this actually represents the bend that you'll be creating. So when you go to that bend menu, it has a number of options under non-linear deformer attributes, being curvature, low bound, and high bound. Right now, if I change the low bound to high bound, it doesn't seem to do anything. However, if I change the curvature, you can see that it does in fact start to bend our cylinder. Now, Say I want to create the shape of the handle. So what I'm going to do is bend the curvature in the correct direction. And you will notice that if I play with my low and high bound settings, it controls the amount of the curve, or the degree of it. So if I have my low bound set to a lower number, I can increase where and how that curve takes place, so it's not as drastic. Alright, so say this is a relatively handle-like shape. Now you'll notice that if, say, I want to edit part of my cylinder right now, maybe make it a bit flatter so it better resembles the handle, you can still use our, for example, scale tools to do so. Now you might have noticed that while I was adjusting sort of the thickness and the width of the handle, you'll notice we have a slight problem. Say I want to make my handle smaller so that it's more proportional with the cup. Well, if I try to do that, it actually affects the extent of our curve. And so if I make it too small, the curve we created starts to disappear almost entirely. So, what can I do? If I go into Select, ensure I have my object selected, and if I go under Edit, there is an option to duplicate. If I click on that, and if I were to move my mesh out of the way, you can see it created a duplicate of our handle. However, unlike the original handle, where it is still connected to the bend curvature, if I resize my duplicate, it preserves that curve we have created. So now that I have the shape of the handle I want, I can delete the original mesh, and there you have it. We have our curved handle-like shape that we can edit however we need to. Alright, so that was the curve tool. The second technique that we'll be reviewing is the use of Hypershade. Now, first of all, what is Hypershade and why would we use it? So, you may already be familiar with the use of materials, such as Lambert and Blinn, which are typically our two most popular ones. So right now, if I were to go to this cup, and I were to add a new material, say I added in Blinn, I could create a cup and make it any color I want. And that works, in most cases, that works relatively well. But you will notice that the cup is only one solid color. Now, what if I don't want my cup to be one color, but instead I want it to have a pattern, or if I want to have some other kind of texture or design to it? Well, this is where Hypershade could come in handy. So let's review how exactly we get our Hypershade. You'll notice that if you go under Assign New Material, it isn't actually listed anywhere here. That's because it does work slightly differently. So what you want to do instead is go up to your Windows setting and go under Rendering Editors. There you will see the option for Hypershade as the third one. If you click on it, it will take you to a separate window. Alright, so once you open Hypershade, as you can see, it creates this window with a number of options. Now, unfortunately, due to some limitations in screen capture, I will be demonstrating this part via screenshots. So as you can see, the materials from our material menu before are present along the side, and you're able to scroll down to access the rest of them. However, there are also a number of other options, including options to change the material properties and our preview of the shader ball itself. What we want to focus on, however, is creating, say, a new texture for our cup that we have been using earlier. And so what we are going to do is, from the menu along the left, you can drag the blend. We're going to be using blend, and so you can drag the blend option into this center space that currently says press tab to create a node. And after you drag the blend option there, you also want to look for a material labeled file and add that one as well. Once you have dragged both materials into this workspace, they will be present. However, they will be looking slightly different, as they have these separate menus you can see that are connected by arrows, some other things, a number of colors. However, to keep this fairly straightforward, this isn't something that you need to worry about too much. The main step that we want to do here is that the file material we added will be where we add the texture or the pattern that we want for our cup, and the blend is the material itself that it will be projected on, so to speak. So what you want to do is, there's an option here that says out color and a little green dot. If you hold down the left key of your mouse on this dot, and if you drag it, you will notice that it will create an arrow, similar to the ones that you see here. So what you want to do is, from out color, you want to left click, drag, and create an arrow, and then you want to drag the arrow over to your blend menu. And you want to place the arrow on the very top option, which will be color. So, if this is done correctly, it will create an arrow connecting your out color option of the file material to the color option of your blend material. You will notice that the menus are in a slightly different place from where we had it previously. However, I have just dragged those manually so as to better see the connection between out color and color. Menu placement doesn't need to be in a particular spot per se. The main thing, again, that we are focusing on is this connection. Alright, so the next part is actually adding your file itself. So ensuring that you have the file window or menu selected, you want to look for the setting under File Attributes labeled Image Name. And next to Image Name, at the very end of this bar, you see there's a little folder symbol. If you click on that folder, it will allow you to access your computer's documents, saved files, etc. And from there, you will be able to select the file that is the texture you want. And so, if done correctly, the texture that I chose was an image of some gears, and so I selected the gears, and you will notice that it has created a preview of that texture on my shader ball in the thumbnail under file 1, and the computer's custom, as you can say, URL is now listed in this image name slot. So again, to select the file that you want to use for your texture, you will need to click on this little folder symbol and search for that file within your computer. The last thing that you want to do before we close our Hypershade window is you will notice that under Blend, it was previously named Blend 2. However, if you're going to be working with a number of textures or materials in general, it can be fairly beneficial to name them or label them so you can keep track of them. So in this case, I have just labeled mine Gear Texture. Alright, so now that we have our new material created, all you need to do now is to click on the object we want to apply the texture to, access our menu, and if you go under Assign Existing Material, you will see that our gear texture is there. And so, if you have that selected, you will notice that instead of appearing, the cup looks gray. So why is that the case? In order to see any materials that were created in Hypershade, you need to make sure you have this option selected, Label Textured, and it has a little checkerboard symbol. If you click on that, you will be able to see all of your textures in the preview. So as you can see, the gears texture that I wanted is now applied to the cup, and I can make any additional changes to that later on, if I so wish. Alright, so another thing that you might want to keep in mind is that Hypershade can be used for your objects, or it can even be used for your backgrounds. So say if I were to put a simple background together, using these polygon planes, so the only difference when you are creating, so the process to create a background is fairly straightforward in that it is more or less the same as the process that we just used in order to create our gears texture. However, the only difference would be that instead of using Blend as the material, you would most likely be using Lambert. The reason for this is that, as you might notice with our cup, the blend material is affected by light, and so depending on the kind of background that you have, say if it's an outdoor scene, if you want it to look fairly realistic, then you don't want to have light reflecting off of places where it shouldn't logically be present. So if I click on one of my background planes, then you can see, so there we go. So this is the texture that I created slightly earlier, or before, but using the same process. That again is just done through Hypershade, and using this image of a garden as my background. And if I also assign the gear texture for this pavement, you can see in fact that I now have a custom background for my cup. The next thing that we'll be taking a brief look at is some realism with lighting. And really, the main part to this is keeping in mind what kind of background you're using and what light source would fit that best. So for example, if you're using an outdoor garden scene, if it's a sunny day for example, then you want to consider using something like ambient light for example, as is a light setting that will create an even amount of bright light all around your object, and so that it mimics what you would expect to see if you were to go outside and look for natural lighting. In contrast, say if you were to use something like a directional light, for example, and you made it relatively harsh, almost kind of like a spotlight. Well, the effect would look relatively unnatural because if you were to go outside, you would expect there to be an even amount of light, more or less everywhere, especially if it's a sunny day. And so it wouldn't make sense if the rest of your garden scene, for example, is particularly dark and you only happen to have one very focused shaft of light. Alternatively, if you were creating an indoor scene and say you had something like a lamp, then a directional light would be appropriate because, especially if your lamp is close to your cup, you would have an additional amount of light coming from that source, and depending on the way the lamp is oriented, that light would only be going in one direction. And so if you were to have an ambient light in that case, it may or may not make sense depending on if there's other light sources in the room. So to demonstrate, I have a few sample renders here using various lighting sources. So this first one was created using an area light, and as you can see, the entire scene appears relatively well lit, as you would expect if you were outside on a sunny day. Similarly, the shadow on the cup is focused primarily near the bottom of the cup, as though the light source were coming from overhead. By contrast, however, creating a directional light focused on only one side of the cup creates a slightly more unrealistic effect, in the sense that if you were imagining that the sun is your light source, you wouldn't expect it to only be coming from one angle and at such a harsh degree. Furthermore, it causes the rest of the scene to be a bit darker, which in a realistic setting wouldn't be the case, as you still expect it to be brighter because it is daylight out. The darker use of directional lighting, however, would probably be better suited for, say, an interior setting, where if you had something like a lamp focused on the cup at a particular angle, then this kind of lighting and shadows is more plausible. Another beneficial trick is that if you're trying to adjust your lighting to fit the particular mood of the scene, or perhaps if you want it to be a bit brighter or dimmer, you will find in the menu for your lighting settings there are options to change the color and the amount of luminosity coming from your light source. And so to compare, you can see that although the same type of light has been used as in the previous example, by changing the color of the light source to pink, it has created this sort of purple to magenta colored hue over the entirety of our scene, compared to the use of the planar lighting and used in the render before. And so again, this is a factor that you could take into consideration depending on what you are trying to depict with your scene. Last but not least, the final part that we will be looking at are renders. And so, you'll notice here it says Maya software. However, if you click on that, it will actually open a drop-down menu featuring a number of different names such as Maya software, Maya hardware, Maya vector, etc. These are all different renderers, and they can be used to create a different look to your final image. So, what I mean by this is that the standard one, Maya software, is probably the standard one that you will be using, as it is relatively fast to render, creates a fairly effective appearance, and is very useful if you want to quickly test out the appearance of a scene in a render. Now you notice if I were to change the render, such as to Maya hardware, it creates this shadow. However, the shadow is partly distorted. Similarly, if I were to use the Maya renderer, Maya hardware 2.0, you will notice that instead it has created a smoother shadow, and it has also created a richer, or almost more vibrant colors compared to what we had in the Maya hardware. And so different renderers can be used to serve different purposes, such as Maya vector, which may seem like a bit of a strange choice, but you will notice that it has reduced everything in the scene down to very simple lines. And so the final renderer that we have is the Arnold renderer, and you will notice that with the lighting, the colors, and especially the shadows, it has one of the most realistic effects out of all 5 of the renders. However, it does take the longest amount of time to finish loading and to complete that render. And so, it is best suited if you are almost finished your project or very close to it, while Maya software is I would say more reliable if you want to do small test renders throughout. Another thing to quickly note is that to always keep in mind the lighting and the materials that you are using in your render, as depending on the renderer that you have selected, not all effects and lighting in particular will behave how you want it to. And you could tell if a renderer is not responding well if there are parts of your image that are black and your background or your object are not showing. If that is the case and you cannot see the display, take some time to explore various options and see how you can change or edit your lighting or your materials, or perhaps even the renderer itself, so that it is able to create the effect that you're looking for. And there you have it. That is all of our techniques and tricks for improving editing in any projects in Maya.